Good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School. Welcome to Business Over Breakfast, and thank you for joining us today. If you're in North America, I hope you are keeping cool through this hot heat wave. If you want to share what temperature it is at 9 o'clock in your place, put it in the chat. I think it's 77 degrees here. Over the course of our Business Over Breakfast series, we've focused on several facets of leadership and, importantly, leadership communication. Today, we're pleased to welcome back Dr. Steve Shepherd, a global citizen, having worked, written, and photographed in more than 90 countries. Steve is an executive educator, a musician, a technology enthusiast, a master storyteller, and a published author. It's exhausting just thinking about it, Steve. Steve frequently teaches topics ranging from storytelling, connecting values to strategy execution, and reverse engineering the future to capture value through technology in business. Our goal today, as with all our Business Over Breakfast webinars, is to provide relevant ideas and information to help us all navigate through uncertain times. And in today's very noisy, competitive environment, the ability to rise above the clangor by connecting in meaningful ways with your teams, and most importantly, your customers and other stakeholders is really critical. Today, Steve is going to share a new paradigm for customer and team engagement that deals with all of the challenges of our modern environment in an effective, professional, and human way. Steve is going to spend about 30 to 35 minutes sharing his insights, and then we'll follow that by about 20 to 25 minutes of Q&A time. So as usual, please submit your questions at the bottom of the screen at any time, either in the Q&A box or the chat, and we'll do our best to get to as many of those as possible. Before I hand the baton to Steve, though, I did want to share a couple of offerings that might qualify for education benefits that an increasing number of companies are starting to offer. First, seats in Goizueta's executive and evening MBA electives, where you can learn alongside MBA students for graduate level credit. And those classes include things like investment banking, portfolio management, the other popular customer lifetime value, product and brand management, Six Sigma, and more. So please look at the website if you're interested in those for yourself or anyone on your team. Second, the Executive Coaching Diploma program, which is an immersive learning experience that aligns with the International Coaching Federation requirements, but also expands on that with explorations into things like brain-based coaching and exploring the impact of family systems. So take a look at those. And in the meantime, Steve, looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicola. I really appreciate that. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I love the range of temperatures we're seeing here across our listening audience here. And also I want to say, for those of you that are not in East Coast time, thank you for getting up so early for what I hope will be valuable. We'll see. Let me share my screen here and bring it up. We're going to talk today about something that I call the power of leadership selling. And hopefully you can all see that. What we're doing here is, yeah.
We can see your, not the presentation mode, we can see the presenter mode.
All right, let's try that again. Hang on one second. How about now? Better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Hit slide share, Steve. I mean, it's still in the preview mode, so to speak.
Okay, it's all right. We'll just leave it. It's not going to hurt anything.
Sure.
As long as everybody can see it. So folks, what we're going to talk about today is what we call leadership selling. And let me explain kind of what I mean by that. Selling is one of those things that people either love or absolutely revile, and for a lot of good reasons. And so what I want to do is I want to walk you through kind of where selling as a function is going. And I want to dispel some of the myths and legends associated with it. And I want us to do that by first actually starting with a conversation about leadership, because it turns out that the two are very much sort of connected at the hip. They're joined at the hip. So let me talk a little bit about what leadership is all about, because really selling is a leadership function. And I should explain a little bit more about that. If you think about the role of a leader, leaders actually get paid to do a very small number of things at the highest level that we think about when we think about leadership. And the most important of those is that the job of a good leader is to create a vision of what could be, not a vision of what is. In other words, they get paid to help people develop a new status quo that's more compelling than the one that they have today. And of course, a lot of that involves messaging and storytelling and compelling conversations, and then demonstrating why it's better along the way. Now, there's another reality here, and that is that all leaders sell. Like it or not, they all sell. Now, not necessarily in the sense of actually selling products or services necessarily, although there are some exceptions to that. For example, John Chambers, the longtime CEO of Cisco Systems out in California, the company that makes routers and firewalls and all that kind of stuff, he was the #1 salesperson in the company. And he did most of it on the golf course because he was a salesperson from day one. That was his function and his focus. But the fact is that even if we don't talk about products and services, we talk about the fact that all leaders have to sell, for example, compelling stories. They have to convince leaders above them to make decisions that are in the best interests of the organization. They have to inspire and motivate not only their colleagues, but the people below them, the people that work for them. They have to motivate customers to give them a sense of why they should in fact be involved. And then they have to often convey messages to the market. And the fact of the matter is, one of the things that I've learned over the years of working with a lot of sales organizations is that all good leaders tend to be naturally good at the sales function. And again, I don't necessarily mean selling products or services or solutions. I mean selling messages. And it turns out that really good salespeople tend to be natural leaders. They tend to inspire others. Now, that's an important relationship when you think about those two, because if you really look at it, then the conclusion we come to is that everybody in the company is a salesperson. It's not necessarily the people at the top, because some of the best leaders I've ever met in organizations were hierarchically at the bottom of the food chain, but they had this remarkable ability to sell ideas, to sell concepts, to motivate people. All of those are sales functions. Now, we're going to get to the actual selling part in just a second, but I wanted to start with this messaging because this is a very important part of this sort of continuum that we're watching happen. If you look at the definition of selling, it's a pretty simple thing. Sales is all about giving something in return for something else, typically of equal or better value, but only when trust is involved. Now, any of you who have been in sales or been associated with sales, pardon me, have heard the term trusted advisor. And if you're like me, it's one of those terms that every time you hear it now, because you've heard it so many times, it kind of makes you gag. It's like, I am so tired of hearing about this trusted advisor stuff. But just go with me for a second on this, because if you think about the term trusted advisor, it's 2 words. And what I'd like you to do is just kind of dissect it with me. We're going to take it apart. And I want to look at the 2 terms separately because I want to give you a slightly different way of thinking about it. Okay? Trusted advisor. Well, why would a customer trust you? In other words, what is it about you as a salesperson or as someone who is selling a concept, an idea, whatever? Why would they trust you? What would motivate them to look at you and say, this is a person I'd like to believe? Well, the answer is because everything that comes out of your mouth in the form of some kind of advisory notice. In other words, you are advising them on things that are important to them. You are helping them understand their industry better, a technology better, a competitive environment better. You're doing something to put them in a better place than they were before you started talking to them. You're advising. This is why we have organizations that are considered to be thought leaders, the Deloittes and McKinseys and PricewaterhouseCoopers of the world, because they advise their clients. They actually have a practice called advisory services. That's what they do. Well, if they advise properly, if they provide their customers with insights, if they help their customers ask the right questions, more important, by the way, than getting answers, then they're going to be trusted. And so the truth is that a trusted advisor is someone in a sales role who does more than simply flog product. Now, keep that in mind as we go through this material. It turns out that the sobering facts are that only about 3% of people in a buying position actually trust professional salespeople. In fact, the only professionals that have less credibility than professional salespeople are politicians and lobbyists. Shouldn't surprise you any, right? This is from a report done by HubSpot a few years ago. So again, going back to what I said a moment ago, selling is about creating trust. It doesn't matter what your job function is, okay? All right, but here's the deal. Selling today is different than what selling was 3, 5, 10 years ago. Selling used to be pretty transactional. And in some cases, it still is. It's about selling a product. It's about selling something that's going to be plugged into some kind of a problem set and then hopefully will help to resolve it. But here's the deal. Today, especially in our world that is so sort of surrounded by technology, where technology solutions are things that are going to help us do our jobs better, make our companies better, make us more competitive, make us more relevant and contextual to the marketplace. It's really more about transformational kind of things. That's why this whole concept of digital transformation that everybody talks about is such a big part of the whole selling mantra. Because what we're saying is there are things we need to do to make ourselves better at what we do so that we can equip our customers with a different business outcome, right? Our job is not to sell a product. Our job is to facilitate a change in the customer's business. That's what we're all about. So in that sense, selling has gone from being transactional, I'm going to sell you software, to transformational. I'm going to put something into your business that's going to change the way you engage with or interact with your customers, your competitors, your suppliers, whoever it may be. And that brings us to the subject of trends. Now, trends are kind of an interesting thing. And I want to let you in on what I consider to be one of the most important little secrets about trends. So I often work with organizations that are in the technology space, not always, but many of them are. And I'll often say to them, what is a trend? Tell me what a good trend is. And they'll often say things like, oh, well, cloud, 5G, IoT, smart agriculture, robotics, artificial intelligence. And my response to them is typically kind of a pause and a smile. And then I will say, those are all good answers. They're wrong answers, but they're good answers because those aren't trends. Those are technologies. All right. Somebody might say bell-bottom jeans or big shoulders if you want to go back to the 80s, whatever. Great. Those are fashion statements. They're not trends. So let's look at the difference. And this is important. A trend is a phenomenon in business or society that develops over an extended period of time and that often drives changes in the industries to which it is relevant. So is cloud a trend? No, it's a technology solution. Is the measurable growing adoption of cloud-based services in the small business sector over the next 18 months a trend? Yes. Now, why does that matter? Why am I being a pain in the butt and making that distinction? For the following reason. One of the things that customers want is for you to bring information to them that will help them change their business. And if you do it in the form of a trend, then you've discovered something kind of important. Number one, you can't deny a trend. The growing use of Internet of Things technologies, for example, in just about every business on the planet, you may not agree with, you may not like it, but you can't deny the fact that it's happening. So you can't deny a trend. So if you come to a customer and say, I want to talk to you about a trend that I believe is going to change the way you do business, they're going to listen to you. Number two, business leaders care because the trend that you're bringing may affect their job or their business or the business outcome that they're attempting to achieve. Number two. Number three, when you meet with a customer and you sit down and have a conversation, you are demonstrating your knowledge and your strategic insights and the fact that you have taken the time to truly understand their business, not just yours, and have a conversation about it. And finally, all those things together represent an opportunity to begin a conversation with a business leader that will help you, in essence, create a better relationship through that whole trusted advisor thing. Okay, that's the point. Sales should always begin with a trend. Why? For the simple reason that it makes the conversation about the customer, not about you. If you walk in the door and say, I'd like to talk to you about our new Whiz-Bang 5000 product that I think is going to really work for you, congratulations, you are representing yourself as a vendor, not as a trusted advisor. There are lots of vendors out there, and the only way vendors differentiate themselves is on the basis of price. It's all about commodity selling. The customer just sits back and waits for this swirling whirlwind of sales to wind down, and whichever one comes out at the bottom wins. But do they win? They don't win because they're at the lowest possible price. That's not a win. The customer's the only one that wins. It's not a two-way street. Whereas if you come in with this concept of selling, making it about the customer and their enterprise and the challenges they're facing, very, very different kind of environment. So what does all this have to do with sales? Well, let me point out something to you that I think is very important. In fact, I'm going to make two observations to you. Number one, I believe that leaders get paid to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to change the business. It doesn't matter what the change is. It may mean growing the business, shrinking the business, diversifying the business, consolidating the business, changing their CapEx posture, changing their OpEx posture, introducing new products or services. Doesn't matter. They get paid to do that. So when you walk in the door and you represent yourself as someone who can help them change the business, you get a seat at the table. Our job is to catalyze that. That's what good salespeople do. They don't come in selling product, they come in selling business outcomes. Here's the other thing. I want you to focus, if you are in or associated with any kind of a sales function, and remember, selling goes beyond product. It goes well into the domain of messaging. There's one thing I want you to do, and that is I want you to make a deliberate act of focusing on going higher and wider in your organization. And let me tell you why. Over the last few years, in many cases, the decision makers for buying have changed. And I'll use the technology world as an example for this. It used to be that IT, the technical center of an organization, made all the decisions about what they were going to buy. Why? Well, because no one really understood what they did. They were clearly important. So if IT said we need more money to buy a new whatever, they got the money. Well, here's the problem. That worked when IT was used primarily as a transactional kind of thing. We need new accounting software. We need a new CRM. We need a bigger mainframe. We need more servers. Fine. But here's what's happened. Because technology has become more of a transformational tool in the average typical enterprise, it has become recognized as one of those things that will help organizations change their own business, which means that if I'm the chief operations officer or the chief strategy officer or the chief marketing officer of an organization, I want to have some say over how the IT budget gets spent, because after all, it's going to help me transform my part of the business. As a consequence of this, the IT budget in many organizations has been scattered across all of the vertical business units in the company, and IT has been relegated to nothing more than sort of an order taker. It's almost as if they were an extension of procurement. And as a result of that, their ability to make decisions goes way down. Here's the other thing. Typically, what has happened is that when salespeople go to talk to IT in a vendor kind of relationship, they tend to talk to mid-level IT people. There's nothing wrong with that except for one fundamental thing. Mid-level IT people make mid-level decisions about mid-level budgets. Is that really where you want to spend the bulk of your time? I submit to you that the answer is no. You probably want to talk to other people as well that are higher up, because after all, higher level people make strategic decisions about much bigger budgets, okay? So when you walk in the door of a business unit executive's office and you're going to have a conversation about whatever it is you're attempting to sell, technology or otherwise, listen very carefully. You will be handed off to the person you sound the most like. So if you walk in the door and you sound like a technology salesperson, you're very quickly going to find yourself standing at the door of IT, because executives don't talk about technology. It's not their domain for the most part. They will send you to people that understand what you're talking about. Congratulations, you're a vendor. If you walk in the door and say, I want to talk to you about a trend that I'm observing that I believe is going to have a fundamental impact on your organization, and I believe that through a couple of very simple steps, you can get ahead of it and use it to your competitive advantage, they're going to offer you a cup of coffee and a chair. That's a very different relationship. So as a salesperson, I want you thinking about going higher and wider in the organization. People will often say to me when I suggest this is, are you insane? How would I talk to a chief marketing officer? I don't know the first thing about marketing. Well, A, are you capable of doing research so you kind of understand what a marketing person does? And B, are you able to have a business conversation as opposed to a technology conversation? Because if you can, then you can have a conversation with any executive. I don't care who it is. Okay. So again, two key observations here. Number one, leaders get paid to change the business. Number two, when you engage, you will be handed off to the person you sound the most like. So be careful. Here's the deal. Customers have a couple of expectations when it comes to this stuff. Number one, technology is no longer the end state. Technology is an enabler of business outcomes. They help to transform the business. And it is only seen as a strategic asset when it does that. Number two, as I said earlier, IT no longer controls its own destiny. So if you're in the tech space, be aware of that. That's very important. It doesn't mean stop talking to IT. It means recognize that there are more ears out there that you need to be influencing than simply the IT organization. Number three, sales is no longer about the quality of the service or the quality of the product or solution that's delivered. It's about delivering a quality of experience that the service makes possible. Why? Because quality of service is an inward-looking measure. Quality of experience is an outward-looking measure. QoE looks at the customer. Quality of service says, does the thing I just sold actually work? Okay, two very different points of view. The customer's message is simple. If you want a seat at the table, you must understand my business and have a conversation about my business. I'm glad your stuff works and it's good. That's table stakes. Don't bother to call me if it doesn't. How are you going to help me transform? That's the key. So ultimately, here's what we find, okay? There are three motives or motivating forces that cause customers to buy. There is a technical motive, there is a business motive, and there is a personal motive. The technical motives tend to be table stakes, okay? If you're selling engineering services or you're selling some kind of a piece of software that a business needs, or you're selling IT, whatever, all the things listed there are truly foundational. If it doesn't do those things, if they don't align with the needs of the business from a technical point of view, don't bother. Number two is really important. This is the business motive that says, how are you going to help me change my CapEx or OpEx posture? How are you going to help me position myself better relative to the competition? How are you going to give me breathing space to innovate more effectively? How will you help me serve my customers so that I can build a better experience with them? How will you help me create more loyalty with my own employees? And how will you give me the breathing room I need to develop and put into the market better products and services? This is where you create value as a salesperson. And then we have the personal motives. These don't go into an RFP, but they are very important because they recognize that you see the challenges that the person you're dealing with is facing. How can I help you achieve your goals and objectives more effectively? What are you faced with personally? Are you stressed? Are you overworked? Do you feel as if you're stalled in your job? Are you not visible enough to higher levels of leadership, et cetera? Are there things we can do that will help to change those things? And this is where you create influence. If you put those two together, the creation of value and the creation of influence, this is how you differentiate relative to the competition. Because here's the deal. If you think about your own company, do you make good products and services? This is a good time to say yes. Of course you make good products and services. Do your competitors? Of course they do. So what else you got? And the answer is a focus on the business motives and the personal motives that allow you to ultimately create differentiation through influence and the creation of value. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. All right. So here are the challenges we face as a sort of a sales professional or someone attempting to sell a message or a motive or a direction or a call to the market. First of all, you got to get the first meeting and get in to meet with the customer. Second, you got to stay in the meeting. We often say that a customer may give you an hour on their calendar, but they actually give you the meeting 15 seconds at a time, and you have to earn every one of those 15-second increments. Because at any point in time, the customer can reach under the desk and push the secret button that says, call me out for an unavoidable meeting. All right. Then you got to get a second meeting. You've got to differentiate yourself. You've got to guarantee that everything you say is contextual and relevant to the customer. You've got to be seen as a thought leader, somebody who's bringing new information to this customer about their industry. And folks, you may not think so, but it's remarkably easy to do that if you deliberately study the trends and you want to be seen as a trusted advisor. And this is why we call it leadership selling, because our focus is not on product. Our focus is on helping leaders achieve what they're attempting to achieve by doing business with us, by meeting with us, by giving without any expectation of anything in return. If you do that, then you start to look a lot more like a professional services organization and a lot less like a desperate vendor trying to sell their wares. And that's what we all want. Ultimately, what you want to do is you want to be the signal that rises above the competitive noise. I like to tell groups that you can't stand out by fitting in. You've got to sound different, look different, act different than everybody else. And the way to do that is by focusing on the business outcomes and helping the executives achieve what they're attempting to achieve. Now, this concept of leadership selling that we teach is based on what we call the trusted advisor star. And you see it in front of you here. If you start on the left where it says trends or compelling event, this is where we always start. And let me kind of give you a high level view of this star. It's got 4 quadrants. In the upper left and going clockwise around the star, we have the engage phase, the explore phase, the recommend phase, and the support phase. We always start with the trend. The trend is typically something going on in the industry that begins with a conversation like this. The reason I wanted to meet with you, executive customer, is because I've been tracking a trend that I think is fascinating. And more importantly, I believe it's about to have a growing impact on your business. And I'm talking about, for example, the Internet of Things technologies and the analytics of data that comes with that. I notice that it is not as well deployed in your industry and specifically in your company as it could be. And I'm just curious why that is, because I believe that if in fact it were to be used more, it could have a significant impact on your business. In fact, the data suggests that, and you intersperse a fact. What you've just done is you've demonstrated credibility, knowledge, commitment to the customer in their industry, and the ability to have a conversation about something that's rather important. We're going to spend a lot of time in this engage phase because this engage phase is where you establish trust and credibility with the customer and demonstrate that you're committed to them and their business. Once we get through the engage phase and the customer trusts us, recognizes that we're more than just the average vendor, they in effect give us permission to move into what we call the explore phase, which is a phase where we have permission from the customer to dig deeper into their business, to ask questions that they would never answer if they were talking to just a vendor. I want to know more so that I can determine if there's an opportunity here for us to work together. Once you've done that through really good questioning and answering techniques, listening techniques, probing techniques, etc., then we move into the recommend phase, which is where you have the opportunity to finally actually talk about your own business. Notice that in the first two quadrants, you never mentioned your own business because the conversation isn't about you, it's about them. But ultimately you get to a point because you've developed trust where the customer says, you know what, I think we might have something here. And you say, you're right. And I believe that we may be able to help you achieve what you're attempting to achieve. That's the recommend phase. And then finally, when we get into the support phase, this is after the deal is done, after the contract is signed, after the champagne glasses have been clinked, you don't go anywhere. You're still there to help the customer through post-sales support. Why? Because you want them to know that you are not operating as a once and done partner, that you're still there for them. 6 months after the deal is done, you're still sending them occasional articles and white papers that you ran across that say, hey, I read this, it made me think about you. I thought you'd find it interesting. What you're really saying is, remember what we did before? I wonder if there might be other opportunities out there for us to work together. Or if the business is big enough, maybe this customer could help you find other opportunities within the business that you could go address, okay? Now, one last comment before I move on, and then we'll wrap up and go to Q&A. I want to observe that in traditional selling, in traditional transaction-based selling, which honestly is what most salespeople do, they spend the bulk of their time in the recommend quadrant. Why? Because that's where objection handling happens. In the world of leadership selling, we spend most of our time in the engage phase. We spend most of our time getting to know the customer and establishing trust and credibility for the simple reason that if we don't have trust and credibility, then the customer sees us as an undifferentiated vendor, okay? We offer nothing of value to them. And if that's the case, then why bother, right? So we front load this relationship in the engage phase, and in leadership selling, there's very little in the way of objection handling. It's really more about a few questions, a few points of clarification. Why? Because we've taken the time to get to know the customer, and whatever it is we propose, if we propose, it's the right solution for that customer and whatever it is that they're facing, okay? That's the key. So here's the deal. In traditional selling, kind of a summary here, we tend to sell to the IT department. We tend to sell to a lot of sort of RFPs and RFQs. We tend to focus on products, features, and functions and benefits. Very tactical. We stay in the recommend phase. In leadership selling, we don't sell to IT. We, not exclusively anyway, we sell to leadership, and we talk about new opportunities, better business outcomes, and we focus on what we call the aspirational gap, which is the gap that exists between where the customer is and where the customer wants to be. And we discover that gap during the explore phase of the Trusted Advisor STAR. Our job is to narrow that gap so that they can bridge it. All right. That's more strategic. It's much more planned. And it means that we spend more time truly getting to know the customer and their business situation rather than spending a lot of time handling objections at the end. It's a more subtle, more sophisticated, and more professional way to engage with the customer. Ultimately, here's what we find. We've been doing this for many years, and it really works. So here's the deal. Traditional selling tends to be reactive, focused on product or service, very tactical. We tend to be seen as a vendor, and our focus is short-term. We focus on selling, okay? Whereas leadership selling is much more proactive. I'm coming to you not with a product, but with a message, right? We tend to focus on service or customer experience. We're much more strategic. We tend to be seen less as a vendor, more as a trusted advisor, and our focus tends to be long-term. What are the results that we see, that we've seen over time for a very long time? We tend to find that we have a reduction in most companies in RFP requests that are followed by an increase in sole sourcing. Because look, we know that you can't, by law, law. You can't go in and try to get around the RFP process. It's there for a reason. But by having a relationship with the executives, you can influence the RFP, which puts you in a much better place, right? We tend to see increased margins based on business value and a return on the investment that the customer is making. We tend to see more internal customer referrals, more accurate and predictable sales forecasting because of the relationship we have and the quality of information that we get from the customer. And finally, we see improved scope of work, improved expectations, and better problem solving from the customer to us saying, you helped me change the business. And that's what this is all about. So I'm going to stop there and open this up to questions. Again, I want to thank you, and I want to reiterate that this is not just about selling products. This is about focusing on executives, decision makers, people whose responsibility is to change the business. If you walk in the door and that is your goal, then you win every single time. So let me stop sharing here and get out of our old nemesis PowerPoint and turn this back over to the really important people on the call.
So Steve, thank you for that. It's fascinating in terms of thinking about, even my own leadership. It's like, okay, I'm apparently paid to change things. So let's go ahead and do it. Jeff Miller did ask RFP. So request for proposal is what that acronym stands for. Have a few questions, and please, everybody, put your questions in the chat or the Q&A. But let's start off with, you talked about integrating current trends to demonstrate strategic thinking. And with so many sources of news these days, do you have a few that you sort of reliably go to keep a sort of finger on the pulse of business and by industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I know you can't read them, but all of these are technology books that I've written over the years, because I kind of grew up in the telecom and IT world. So I've got a kind of a technology focus, as evidenced by a lot of what I said today. And it always surprises people that I talk to when I tell them I don't read any technology journals. I no longer read Telephony Magazine or LAN Magazine or any of the technology-centric magazines. And the reason is that they tend to be kind of vendor-driven. Here's an article about a trend, but really at the end it says, so this is why you should buy the Whiz-Bang 5000 from this company. Sorry, that's biased and it doesn't serve. I read business-centric stuff. I read, for example, I'll give you a great example. Deloitte has an internal practice called TMT, Technology, Media, and Telecom. And that is the practice that serves all of their customers that are in that space. So they publish constantly great articles about the world. So if you go to Deloitte's website and visit the TMT thing, you can sign up. There's no charge. They won't pound you with stuff. They'll send you once a week an article that says, hey, based on the preferences that you told us about, we thought you might find this interesting. And McKinsey does the same thing. And PricewaterhouseCoopers does the same thing. And Forrester does the same thing. They all do this. My point is, I read the business stuff. And if people want specifics, I actually have a list. In fact, Nicola, I can send it to you, and you're welcome to share it with anyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know. And obviously, if somebody comes in and says, okay, I'm a business executive and I think IoT is important and I need to be focusing on IoT or cloud or cybersecurity or whatever, of course, I have technology sources that I can use, but I don't let those define how I'm going to help an executive change the business. I let the business stuff do that. Because look, you can have the greatest technology in the world, but if your business practices are such that they don't differentiate you and you suffer at the hands of competition, you're living in the red ocean and you're going to lose every single time because you're not differentiating. So I'm happy to provide that list if you like.
That'd be great. There's some people in the chat that have already said they'd love it. I have a question here about, great point about all leaders sell. Can you talk a little more about selling internally? You
Absolutely.
The business, but how does this translate? And in fact, I was going to ask the same questions, like, how do I do this, like, to my team or to colleagues or up the organization?
That's a really good question. And I think if I were to summarize it before I give you the real answer, I would summarize this. Leaders have an opportunity to do one of two things. In fact, let me do it this way. Here's the leader, okay? Vertical, horizontal, whatever, I don't care. Okay, here's the leader. The leader can actually be a catalyst that accelerates their people's ability to get to customers and deal with customers and satisfy their needs and wants and desires, or they can serve as a barrier to that. And I see both on a pretty constant basis. The reality is that the key to selling internally is communication. And I know that sounds all foo-foo and we've got to communicate, let's hold hands, we are the world. But here's the deal. Most businesses are so focused on communicating with the outside world that they forget that there is an inside world that is every bit as important as those that are outside. Because look, executives are not the ones that deal with customers. To use an overused phrase, the point of the spear is typically the sales organization. The salespeople are the ones that go out and get to know the customer, deal with the customer, manage the customer, help the customer, serve the customer. If the executive is not doing everything in their power to guarantee that there is cross-silo communications within the organization, then they're doing the organization a serious disservice. What it also means is they're much more focused on the internal quality of service. Are our products working? And less focused on, are we doing everything in our power to satisfy the customer's needs? Let me end this with a great quote from one of my personal heroes, Tom Peters, the guy that wrote In Search of Excellence back in the 80s. One of the chapters begins with this quote. He says, in too many organizations, I've read it so many times I can quote it verbatim. In too many organizations, the customer has become a bloody nuisance, whose unpredictable behavior messes up carefully made strategic plans, whose business operations screw up computer operations, and who stubbornly insists that purchased products should work. If the executive is posing that as the way things happen, bad. Internal communications is about communicating everything that people need to do their jobs. And that also means listening. If you're not listening, if you're not doing what Tom Peters often called management by walking around, listening to people, talking to people, understanding what's going on, what are the challenges, what are the barriers I can get rid of that will help you get to the customers better, faster, more accurately, more efficiently, then you're not doing your job. And that's a critical thing. You can't lead from the ivory tower. It doesn't work. Simple as that.
And I think maybe that's the answer that you're going to give to this question from Michael Young. Selling to the executive has been a goal forever. However, these are incredibly busy people. If everyone does this, supposedly with the goal of delivering insight, how does one differentiate themselves to start that relationship?
Every executive is protected by a gatekeeper. And most of us believe that gatekeepers, the job of a gatekeeper is to block. That's not their job. The job of a gatekeeper is to filter. Remember what I said earlier, you will be handed off to the person you sound the most like. So if you walk in the door and you say, I'm here from Acme Corporation and I'd like to talk to your boss about the new Whiz Bang 5000, I'm sorry, he's not in the office. Let me introduce you to IT, right? As opposed to, I'm here to talk to your boss about a business trend that I'm watching that I believe is going to have a significant impact on your business. And I want to make sure that they're aware of it and what they need to do about it. That's a very different conversation. You're going to get filtered through. They are very busy people. That's absolutely true. But they're not too busy for the right message. They will make time for you. And this is not hopeful. I'm watching this on a regular basis. This is how it works. So if you take the time to understand what's going on in their business, what the trends are that could affect them, what kind of things they're facing, how you can help them move from sort of red ocean into blue ocean, how you can help them differentiate themselves from everybody else, that's the message they want to hear every single time. One final point. Most executives, if they're worth their salt, are not looking for answers. They're looking for opinions. They didn't get to be executives because they're stupid. They got to be executives because they're smart and they're insightful and they've already asked all the questions that they want to ask. What they want is secondary points of view or confirmation of what they already believe. And if you can walk in the door and deliver that, you win every time. And that's a different conversation than a product conversation. Hope that helps.
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions here that are around this notion of trends. So Linda asks, is professional coaching a trend? And then Jeff Miller also asks, what is an extended period of time to declare a trend? If we wait too long to classify something as a trend, what is the risk of being too late for the customer?
Okay, so great questions both. So professional coaching, that in and of itself is a business function. It's not a trend. The use of acceptance of delivery of professional coaching and its broad acceptance within business over 18 months or whatever period of time you want to look at, that's a trend. It's always over a period of time. Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Is it getting more attention? Is it getting less attention? That's the trend. Professional coaching is good. Okay, great. That's not the basis for a conversation. I find it interesting that more and more companies are relying on external third-party professional coaches to guide their executives. I find that interesting, don't you? That's a trend, okay? That's a conversation that indicates you've taken the time to look at it and go, interesting, isn't it, how this is kind of doing this, but it's growing across time. Okay. The second part of the question, if I understood the question correctly, there is no sort of, it's got to be at least 12 months and then it's a trend. It has to be something that is happening over a period of time that is long enough to allow whatever it is you're talking about to actually have an impact on that business. So for example, if we were to look at adoption of cloud services were first introduced in 2006 when Amazon Web Services came into being, okay? And I'm talking about that kind of cloud service, okay, commercial cloud. It's a long time, that's 16 years. But it is a trend and it continues to grow and diversify and get bigger and so on. So you could say it's a 16-year trend if that served your conversation. However, you could look at the last 2 years and say, look what has happened in 2 years in terms of it's more than storage, it's now computing, it's now platform, it's now cybersecurity, et cetera. That's a different trend for a different conversation with a different executive. So you pick the interval, just make sure there's an interval. Don't make the mistake of saying, I want to talk about IoT. That sounds suspiciously like a product conversation. I want to talk about the fact that IoT has been strangely adopted by agriculture and is making a huge difference in one of our oldest industries and one of our most beleaguered industries. That's a very different conversation. I hope that helped.
There's some interesting things going on in chat. A lot of people love the walking around quote of Tom Peters. That's something that is always so effective. And then Thomas says, made a comment about lead to your solution, not with your solution.
Brilliantly said. I've never heard that before. Thank you, Thomas. That is absolutely true.
So we've got some more questions here. Jay asks, what if you provide advisory services to help leaders and their organizations become better prepared, ready and able to compete in the future, one of disruption and uncertainty? And he goes on, would the trends be one, increasing disruption and uncertainty and the impact it has on business leaders? And two, companies that are ready and prepared perform better?
That's a great question. And I'm not sure exactly how to answer it, but let me answer this way, and then we'll go back to it. Remember, I talked a little bit about that aspirational gap that says customers here, but they think they want to be here. And if that's the case, then you've got two choices. Number one, you can look at that and go, great, that's perfect. I'm going to show you how to narrow that gap. I'm going to show you business practices and perhaps technological catalysts that will help you do that. Great, we can do that. But here's the other conversation that can be mildly risky, but depending on how well you're prepared, it can also be the most valuable conversation, which is, help me understand why you want to be here. I think there may be a different place or a better place or a slightly evolved place that you're not thinking about that you might want to consider. For example, I think it's great, and I'm making this up as I go along. It's true, but I'm making it up as I go along. You tell me that you want to implement Internet of Things technology so that you can generate all this data and collect it. That's great. You can even analyze it. Cool. How are you going to analyze it? Because, you know, one of the things that most organizations have discovered, and this is actually true, and I find it fascinating, is that when they go out into the field, they've got all this data now that they're getting from all these disparate sources that include, you know, all these different things that generate data. Now they've got the data, they've analyzed it, they've categorized it, they've got a sense of what's going on. They don't really know what the implications are. They go out into the field to find out who that person might be. And it's funny, the number one person that corporations are attempting to hire and can't find them because there aren't enough of them are industrial psychologists, not data scientists, not IT people, not technologists, industrial psychologists. Why? Because an industrial psychologist has one leg in the world of industry and one leg in the world of psychology. And their job is to look at the data and say, what does this tell us about the people that we're attempting to influence as a vendor or a seller or a provider of some kind of a service? So it's a fascinating kind of a take. And if you were to come to a customer and say, let me challenge you a little bit on this, this is what's often called challenger selling, then you've just said to them, with all due respect, let me give you a different point of view. Well, if I'm an executive, I may not like the fact that I suddenly have to reconsider what I've been thinking all along, but if it helps me do my job more effectively, if it guarantees that I'll still have one next year, maybe I want to listen to this. Talk to me. All right. So, I mean, that's kind of how I think I would approach that particular question, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now, I know you've got a hard stop, Steve, so I want to respect that. Peg did make a comment in the chat around, so we have to take acting classes as well now. And I would push back on that. I think it's about are we curious? Can we be curious? But anyway, I want to give that to you to comment on about.
That's great. I love that. Acting classes, no. It's not about acting. It's about being informed. It's about having a different conversation. It's about setting aside what we traditionally have been taught as salespeople or as people who are responsible for sales, and instead engaging in the conversation with a customer that is less about us and more about them. It's about respecting the fact that the only reason we exist is because of them. And if we want to have that relationship, then we have to have a conversation that's relevant and contextual to their world, not ours. Now, it's obviously both. You know, I'm not completely naive, right? We've got to look, when you sit down with an executive and you have a business conversation, they're not idiots. They know why you're there. They're not stupid. They know you'd like to sell something. But imagine the following scenario. You walk in the door of an executive's office because they've granted you a meeting. Thank you. I really appreciate the time. Let me tell you why I'm here. I've been following a trend that I think is kind of important. I think it's important because I track your industry really closely because it's part of my job. In fact, I spend 50% of my time just advising my clients about stuff going on that I think is important to them. And you may already know this. And if you do, great. You know, I'll give you back half an hour. But here's the deal. This is what I'm watching happening. Bang, 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 bang. I believe that there are some things coming that you could take advantage of that would change the way you do business, that could make you more whatever that we think is kind of important. In fact, I've got a white paper about this. I wrote it, or I found this interesting paper that kind of substantiates what I've told you just now. I want to leave it with you. And maybe a week from now or 2 weeks from now, we can have another conversation about the paper. I'd really like to hear more about your thoughts about that paper. Would that be okay with you? And you shake hands and you leave. And the executive stands up and goes, what just happened? They didn't sell. They didn't mention their company. The whole conversation was about me. How intriguing is that? And that's the end of it. Congratulations, you're a trusted advisor. You're serving them in a way that is different than everybody else. You didn't walk in, shake hands, talk about hockey, and then try to sell them something. You never mentioned anything. You get to that. So when I said you spend more time in the engage phase, this is what I'm talking about. It's taking the time to legitimately and genuinely get to know the customer. If you do that, that's a different ballgame. You're now the signal that rises above the noise.
So I'm going to make this the last question now.
I'm fine. I've got until 5 after, so we're good.
Okay. So any thoughts on how the framework that you shared this morning is similar or different to the Challenger sale by Matt Dixon?
Absolutely. So I teach Challenger. I teach all of the different sales things. And here's the real answer to the question. Anyone that's been in sales for more than about 7 minutes knows that we have Challenger, we have Spin, we have Miller Hyman, we have all these different sales methodologies that are out there. We all know that they take a different tack, but they all kind of go in the same direction. Leadership selling is designed to work with any of those. So this is not to say, stop doing Challenger and start doing leadership selling. That's not it at all. What leadership selling does is it basically conveys a message that says, no matter how you engage with your customer, do it on their terms, not yours. Make it a business conversation, not a product conversation. And if you do that, then it's very easy to walk into a customer's office and say, I've been tracking a trend, and let's invoke Challenger, for example. I bet you didn't know this. I want to share something with you you didn't know before. I think it's important. You challenge them. That's fine. It's about the nature of the conversation you have with this person. Now, look, we could pull in all kinds of stuff like, the color thing, right? Or is this a type A manager, or is this person analytical versus whatever. I mean, there's all those different methodologies, right? You could pull in any of those that would then dictate the nature of the conversation. If the person's a type A person, right? If they're a driver, then you know that you've got to come in and drive right back. You've got to come in and poke them in the chest and say, but you didn't know that, did you? That's very different than dealing with someone who tends to be more amiable or more analytical or whatever, right? That's the key. This is designed to sort of sit on top of any of those as a philosophical approach, and then allow you to use whatever sales methodology you're typically using to drive the relationship. And it works. It works every time. We work with a lot of different companies that use a lot of different methodologies, and this kind of just sits on top of them. That's all.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Steve.
Of course.
Hand over to Pam to close us out.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I think one of the things that I always take away from conversations with you, sessions with you, is that it's really about being curious and remaining curious, both about your own company, about what's going on inside of your company and your industry, and about your customers' company and what's going on inside of their industries. So thank you for that reminder again this morning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Pam.
And before we go, of course, I like to do a quick look at what's coming up next for Bob. So our next session would be scheduled during the holiday week of July 4th. And instead of bringing together, because we've got a lot of folks out on vacation, we're going to be sending out a recording of one of the fan favorites, if you will. If you have a particular one you'd love to see, please go to our LinkedIn page and just provide a comment to us about one you'd like to see again. Posted in the chat earlier was also where you'll find our videos of prior sessions on our YouTube channel. Coming up in July, it's a really nice pairing to the session we had this morning. It will be a conversation with Kimberly Evans around everything in business relies on relationships. So it's really a nice build to our session this morning. Then again, as Nicola mentioned at the start of our webinar, we have some great short courses coming up. I don't believe she mentioned this morning, but she has previously about our AI and machine learning for business coming up in August. But really importantly, we have seen more and more companies that are offering their additional financial assistance for degree programs for our 4-credit MBA courses. So we invite you to check out more on our website, and also to check out our coaching diploma program, as coaching has become a way to really engage with your team and help your people. So it's not just for those seeking to become executive coaches in an official capacity, but rather to help you develop as a leader. So with that, we say thank you again for joining us this morning. Steve, thank you again for sharing your time with us. And we wish you a very happy summer.
Cheers, everyone.
Take care.